Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Florio. This is a bit of a different thing than I normally do. I don't normally make content, so I apologize. It's not in the traditional format or anything that's going on. I did, however, just wanted to do a quick response to Pirate Software, also known as Thor. I hadn't expected to make a video again on this so soon, but Thor has responded in less than 24 hours to some of the critiques he's been getting. If you're not familiar, please check out my channel for part 1 of my response to Thor, also known as Pirate Games. I would say the usual like, subscribe, comment, all that sort of stuff, but honestly, otherwise, I just wanted to put out my response. Thanks, and thanks for watching.
And the other day I put out a video called Stop Killing Games, saying why I would not support the initiative. Overall, it was actually quite positive. So let's discuss the most common requirement of the initiative, which is games have to be left in a functional, playable state. Now, what happens if that game is a online-only live service game? That means the devs have to release either server binaries or somehow carve off the game to be a single-player experience now. Some way to keep it functional and playable, right? Now, many of you are requesting, yes, I should get the server binaries so that I can go and make private servers for this. But that doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world. And the reason why is because it leaves developers open to abuse. So let's explore that a little bit. Let's say that you made your own video game, and you made a live service game. Maybe it's an MMO, maybe it's something else, right? And let's say that I want to monetize that game, but you don't allow monetization of the game by any other party. You can't just take someone else's art and profit off of it. So then I go, well, how am I going to force you to do this? Under this initiative, you would have to release the server binaries or keep the game in a functional, playable state at end of life. So I hit you with a ton of bots. I hit you with a ton of exploits. I attack your community. I destroy your Reddit. I go after your business. I go everywhere that I possibly can to make this cost as much as it possibly can for you. And let's say that this goes on long enough that your game dies because you can't afford it anymore, and your studio has to shut down. At end of life, you now have to release those server binaries to keep the game in a functional, playable state. At which point I take those, I create a private server, and I monetize it. And some people have said, well, simply don't allow monetization of the server. Well, who's going to enforce that? If you want a government initiative to enforce that, that means the government has to build a registry of all of those games and all of that intellectual property that shouldn't be monetized, and then somehow enforce that with no one owning it because those studios have shut down.
The problem we have here is we've wrapped up a number of logical fallacies for your argument here. Number one, you're creating a straw man. This idea that if you had to release the server binaries or maintain the game in a playable state, that that's somehow going to motivate these third-party actors that are going to want to DDoS your company, use bots, exploits, talk you down in the community, I guess, as well, to somehow get your company to go bust or to get you to shut down the service so that you'll release it so that they can run it as a private server. I'm not even sure that makes feasible sense. Arguably, most private servers are inferior experiences. I've played on a lot of private servers. I've played on a lot of private servers for different games. They aren't the experience of what you would get at retail. Also, I just can't understand the profit motive there. Are these private servers actually making this much money to make this even worth it? It doesn't make sense. Also, you're saying that the government would need to provide a registry to track this content and then a way to enforce it. Have you been on YouTube or streaming? I know you have, Thor. They do this just fine with music. They do this just fine with art. They do this just fine with movies. They do this just fine with TV. In fact, they have automated software that will literally, while you're doing it live, it's not even a human, will process the copyright strikes. That is not really unfeasible, unreal. We already have these systems in place. And the third thing that you're talking about here as well, that, the companies won't be there because they don't exist anymore. Just because a company shuts down doesn't mean that the intellectual property rights just suddenly go away, that somebody doesn't own that intellectual property. Oftentimes, a lot of people do own that intellectual property, or other companies own that intellectual property. Intellectual property is often more than the nuts and bolts of the server code and the artwork that's contained in a game. That intellectual property often is the brand, the story itself. It'd be like saying that because Star Wars Galaxies, the server, shut down, that because that shut down, that it's just okay to make anything Star Wars anymore. No, Disney now owns the intellectual rights to Star Wars universe, and they're making money off it because Star Wars as a concept is interesting. I even reject the fact that in this instance where the game's not maintained, that the company is shut down, it doesn't exist to even occur in the first place. Ubisoft, in your original example of the crew, Ubisoft still exists. Ubisoft probably still retains the rights to the crew. It also is producing lots of other games and has moved on to other things as well. Again, you've wrapped up about 3 different logical fallacies in this and created a straw man to make your point come through. The moment that you do this, you've kind of got to admit, Thor, that you've lost. You're on the wrong side of this.
This scenario gets even worse if you do allow monetization, because now I can just kill off your company and then monetize the server and no one will ever come after me. Now it's even more of a problem.
This problem doesn't exist. This idea that somehow some company is going to be motivated to put all this money in just to steal the code and run some inferior version or less version. Again, this is a straw man that doesn't exist in the real world. It completely ignores how intellectual property rights work. The idea that just because someone else might be able to run it, that they would be legally able to run these things for profit. I mean, Thor, let's also look at the fact that this already exists. Piracy already exists.
And for those of you out there that say, oh, this can be done right now, I could just destroy your studio and take your stuff anyway. You could, but this allows a route for it to be legal to do so. That's the problem.
Except what you're describing, even in your own example, this route is just something that you've made up in your own head.
After putting this out publicly and talking to people about it, I got a couple of takes back. In the most extreme, people said live service games shouldn't exist at all, and the initiative will kill them off for good, and that's a good thing. Well, you don't get to define what players get to play or not play. You also shouldn't be able to get to define what developers build or don't build. You should not have creative control over the developers, and you should not have control over what is in my Steam library or on my phone. That doesn't make any goddamn sense. Aside from that, the initiative does not purport to kill live service games. It would just make it incredibly difficult to build said games and add a lot of risk to it. A lot of people don't realize that this will slowly diminish live service games in the market because it's not an incentive for us to build them anymore, which means you get less multiplayer live experiences. That sucks. I like live service games.
The trouble here, again, you're conflating a number of things. People aren't saying that they want to control developers. People aren't saying that they want to control other players or say what they can and can't play. People are saying that they want the product that they buy to still be there at the end of its life cycle. You're lumping in developers with the corporate side. Often there are a lot of developers that don't want the live service model either. And also you're conflating these two things. I know that technically speaking, things like League of Legends, World of Warcraft, they are considered live service models. However, I think you have to acknowledge the fact, Thor, that that term has grown. Live service doesn't just mean things like MMORPGs or things like COD now. Live service has grown to encompass things that it previously wouldn't have encompassed. I think that makes it hard to have this conversation because you're trying to tar it that they're just trying to kill everything. This is a very disingenuous take. And to say that people are trying to control what other gamers play, that's not the case at all. Nobody has purported that they would want to control other people. They are just saying that they don't like it. And I hate to tell you again, developers, they aren't this group or party that deserves the same consideration as consumers. Developers are in a different part of the power structures. Developers develop a product and they sell the product. Consumers buy the product. And unfortunately, we do need consumer protections. This is not even a controversial take. We see this played out in so many different markets. We've seen this play out in the car market. They had to have anti-lemon laws. We've seen this play out in even like things like tractors with John Deere, where when there is a lack of consumer protections, end up creating predatory situations where farmers are having to jailbreak their developers are not equal to consumers, and there has to be protection for consumers.
So the next one is that this is about games preservation, and that it needs to happen to preserve these types of games for future generations and for everyone to always have forever. But I would argue that this isn't actually preserving these games. Social games, such as, let's say, Apex Legends, require a number of players to be in the match at the same time so that you can have an experience that is only able to be obtained through lots of players interact. It's a multiplayer game. You need a bunch of people. You want to take down these live service games, put them up on a private server, and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense.
And here you're making the point of how people ought to play games, and I'd say you're telling people how to play their games. You have to pick a thing like Apex Legends because, again, you like to cherry pick these little examples that make your argument seem the most strongest, but it falls apart the moment you try to apply it to anything else. The game that you worked on, World of Warcraft, they play this not necessarily for the whole social experience. There are people that play games to speedrun. There are people that play games, I don't know why, it's not my thing, but it exists. The person that likes to play solo on a multiplayer game. There are many games that have more experiences than just this social interaction you're talking about. And when you say it doesn't make sense to you and you think that it shouldn't be preserved, you're actually telling other people the way you're having fun is wrong. Because I don't have fun that way, the way you're having fun is wrong. For someone that worked on World of Warcraft, you would know that part of what World of Warcraft does is it tries to bring in very different players that often enjoy different playing experiences and bring that into one game. So is it therefore that surprising that, let's say that WoW went down, they don't need other players to play the pet battles. They really don't. They can play that against NPCs. What if it's somebody that literally just enjoys the questing? Again, they don't need the social experience. I'm using a World of Warcraft example because that's what's applicable here. And I'm sorry, even in games like League of Legends only takes 10 people. Plenty of people have groups of 10 friends or more. Not everybody is antisocial that would be able to recreate that social experience you're talking about. I'm sorry, this is a very disingenuous take, and it even flies against what you just said, where you said you shouldn't be telling other people how to play. You're doing that here.
Again, we talked about that, so that is not a solution. And the last take that I got from this is an initiative. It's not a law. Why are you upset? Just wait. I'm not going to wait. And the reason I'm not going to wait is because I see the start of this conversation not making sense. It's not including the actual developer side of the conversation. It's not showing the trials and problems that this could arise inside of the gaming industry for people who are actually making the games you play. I don't have any reason to be quiet about that. And many other developers aren't going to be able to speak on this. As I explained before, it's really easy to lose your job if you're working at a major studio and try to speak out of turn on something like this, especially with something people are so passionate about. I should be able to be talking about this. In fact, I should be talking about this. I am a content creator specifically that is a game developer that has worked in this industry for 20 years. This is my wheelhouse.
Here's the issue, though. By your own admission, you're not trying to add to the conversation. You're not trying to change the initiative. You're not saying that the initiative needs to take this into consideration. Your arguments generally come down to this shouldn't happen, this won't work because of hypothetical straw man, so just stop. You have actually taken yourself out of the conversation. You've done nearly every play in the book. We've created straw mans. We have attacked the original creator. You silence opposition on your channels too. These things that you're doing takes you out of the conversation. Inherently, you're taking a very anti-consumer stance. Also disagree with your assertion that developers can't talk because if they're going to be fired. Developers talk anonymously all the time. Developers comment on streams. Developers make submissions. There is nothing that says to anybody that if you're a developer at a company that you have to put a big sign up that says, I work here at this position, this is my email and my phone number. By the way, I have this controversial opinion. There are plenty of spaces where you can interact and have your voice heard. This idea that somehow you are the spokesman for all developers, I would wager there are developers that don't agree with you. There are certainly companies that have philosophies that are much different than what you're spouting. A lot of this, it's not hard to see why you're getting the pushback.
And that's about it. That's all I really wanted to talk about with this. I hope that's clarified some things for some of you. And if you're still mad about this, not much I can do about it. So with that in mind, see y'all later.
Honestly, I'm not even surprised. You haven't added much to the discourse from beginning. Here you have all of these people that buy games, that engage in this medium saying, I don't like this thing. And you're pulling the classic Blizzard move of saying, you think you do, but you don't. That's literally what you're doing here. You need to stop thinking that you know the consumer's mind better than they do. People want to have a product that when they buy it, that in 10 years they can still own it.
I can hear the demons call when they do what they do. And now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta get through. Cause I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's